For our final speaker, before we move into our all-presenter faculty Q&A, we have someone who I'm really excited to have at Philex for the first time. I got to see him speak at FitPro in the UK last year, and I was just absolutely blown away by his sessions and thought that it was really important that you guys got to experience his message. So let me tell you a little bit about Bobby Cappuccio. Known for his dynamic and provocative style, Bobby's an internationally renowned speaker, best-selling author and consultant who develops and inspires trainers, managers, and industry leaders globally to create remarkable results. The co-founder of PTA Global, he's currently the director of coaching for 24 Hour Fitness and has held numerous positions in the industry, including personal trainer, sales consultant, corporate training and development director, and director of professional development for the National Academy of Sports Medicine. Please make warmly welcome Bobby Cappuccio.
Thank you. Here's a question. How many of you got at least one insight from each presenter today that potentially makes you better than you were yesterday and opens up greater possibilities for tomorrow? Raise your hand if that's you. So can we show our appreciation through a round of applause for the outstanding people that have been on this stage throughout the day? They've been absolutely amazing. And for Philex, giving us the forum and the platform to share these ideas. So that's another round of applause in case you were wondering. Go on. I'll wait. Thank you. Brilliant. But how many people come into forums like this and they get inspired and they get a lot of education, then they go back out and Monday morning they become the same exact person they always were? What happens there? Centuries ago, Sir Francis Bacon said that knowledge itself is power. And that might have been true in the context of the times and the environment he was living within, but is that really true today? Is knowledge itself power? I think knowledge being power is analogous to what author Hermann Hesse said when he talked about being a poet without a verse. Knowledge gives you substance, but without application. It has no context and it has no contribution, and with contribution or lack thereof is connected to relevance. So no contribution, no relevance. Knowledge or education plus specificity equals power. Because the definition of power in the Encarta English Dictionary is the ability to produce a result or an effect. So education cannot simply be about answering questions. It has to be about provoking them as well. Would you agree? Because the greater the depth and specificity of your questions, the greater the insight and the greater our potential to help people go from where they are now to where they want to be. Or maybe even more profoundly, going from who they are now to who and what they're ultimately capable of becoming. And one of the most powerful questions I think we could ask within a forum like this, yes, it's so seldomly presented because we assume the answer is so obvious, is what is the purpose of a business? What is the purpose of a business? And the most common answer, because I've asked that question to executives and CEOs, not only in this industry, but in other industries around the world, and it's almost like, are you stupid, Bobby? It's money. No margin, no mission. And that's a mistake. 1982, Tom Peters and Bob Waterman wrote a book, In Search of Excellence, and they took a look at over 40 companies. These just weren't any companies. These were the top 40 Fortune 500 companies in the world, the best and the brightest. And the organizations, they were all doing very well at the time. Most of them are no longer in existence, or they've been completely outperformed by the market. At the time, the organizations who focused on revenue as the sole purpose of their existence were continually outperformed by other organizations where revenue was not the purpose, but the outcome of their business, if you understand what I mean. And other people talk about services and contribution and making, not just creating a place where people can make a living, but make a difference. And I know that resonates with the people in this room because all of us, I would guess, didn't get into this industry to make a living, but to make a difference. We didn't set out to create a business, but to create a cause. But even that is a bit presumptuous because without identifying the true and only purpose of a business, there's no profit and there's no contribution. And Peter Drucker, who is one of the greatest business thinkers of the 20th century, perhaps even the 21st, and that's impressive because we're living in an age now where business gurus seemingly outnumber the actual workforce, don't they? And he said the purpose of a business is to create and then keep a customer. Now that's pretty specific, isn't it? Because if you don't create and keep a customer, there's no revenue. If you don't create and keep a customer, there's no altruistic end that's ever served, that's ever brought into fruition. And what creates and keeps a customer? Well, a lot of things, but we've only got about 20 minutes. So I'll focus on just a couple. The common denominator of creating or keeping a client in our world comes down to value. And that's the bottom line. When value exceeds risk, a client's created. When the perception of risk exceeds the perception of value, a client's lost, an opportunity is lost. Would you agree? I know there's a lot more to it than that. So at the University of Illinois not too long ago, Dr. Ibram Sineh did a study on algorithms. Well, it wasn't really about algorithms. He had groups of people come in and try to figure out word puzzles. But he told the participants, we need to understand your handwriting and get familiar with it so we can grade these things. So he had them write down a series of phrases. One group, he had them write down, I will, over and over and over and over. I will, I will, I will, I will. And that's kind of cool, because what does that sound like? It sounds like a positive affirmation, which if you're trained on positive affirmations, it's positive, it's personal, it's present tense. And we're taught to really affirm what we want because you become what you think about. Really? Do you really become what you think about? If that was true when I was 16, I would have been a 15-year-old girl. So I'm not too sure about that. But it was an experiment. So what do you do in an experiment? Well, experiment, which is how it got that reputation. And he had one group of people write that down. The other group of people, he reversed it. It was an open-ended question. Will I? Will I? And what he found is that significantly, over and over, in every case, the will I people did much, much better on the algorithms than the I will people. So this research was duplicated around, of all things, exercise. And they took groups of people, and they had, for a couple of weeks, people wake up and write down affirmative statements. I will wake up at 5 o'clock every single morning and go exercise. So these weren't vague generalities. These were meaningful specifics, right? Like the worst advice the fitness industry has ever given is exercise more and move less. And eat less. Well, that's kind of like telling someone who's drowning in a pool, swim more, drown less. It's very well mean, but it's not very effective, is it? Thanks, coach. And here's what he found. This was interesting. Compared to their baseline behaviors and performance that was self-reported, the will I people did significantly better. How many of you think that's interesting? Because it's not affirmative, right? It's kind of like, well, will I? But here's what was even more interesting. The I will people did significantly worse compared to their self-reported baseline behaviors. And why is that? Because one of the things we don't talk about in business is integrity. When I'm talking about integrity, am I talking about good people versus bad people? We hear that crap all the time because good people have integrity, right? And bad people, people who don't think like us, well, they lack integrity. But when we talk about integrity, what exactly do we mean? Because semantics do matter. Integrity is doing what you say you were going to do long after the emotional state you were in when you made that resolution has left you. It means keeping your promises to yourself and others. Because think about this, integrity is connected inseparably to self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is your inward belief in your ability to initiate and sustain a series of activities in correspondence with what you truly want. So if every single morning, your first day of you being the best version of yourself is met with you hitting the snooze button over and over and over, is that an act of integrity? So if integrity is connected to self-efficacy and you develop the belief in your incapability of initiating, sustaining actions that are in line with what you want most, what's your future possibilities? And the answer is very dismal, isn't it? But if you set specific, measurable, behaviors. It's not about wanting it bad enough, but doing it consistently enough. And your self-efficacy increases every single day. When the alarm clock goes off, your feet hit the floor. And just doing that day in, day out increases your perception of what you're capable of. And then because of cognitive dissonance, which according to Dr. Aaron Fessinger, is the internal duress that ensues from holding two opposing viewpoints in mind at once, you start to become more and more consistent. And after a while, let me know if you've ever been here in this position, you're consistent for so long that the propensity to turn back becomes more difficult than to keep on keeping on. Have you ever been there? When you initiate an activity, you just stick with it long enough. So not only do you develop a reputation with yourself, where according to Nathaniel Branden, in his book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, we talk so much about self-esteem, I think a little bit too much, quite honestly. But self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself if what you're doing is connected to your values. So the second component of integrity, it's not just about discipline, it's about what do you value. And values are another thing that are misinterpreted for social ideologies. When you sit in a room with a company and you talk about, well, what are your values? They talk about, well, honesty. Well, as opposed to what, really? Like, what other options were you considering in that one? It's not about social ideologies, which is important because that is the thread that the fabric of society is interwoven within. So yes, it's important, but when we talk about values, we talk about love. If you won the lottery tomorrow and time and money were no longer a factor, what would you do with your time? After all the holidays, after all the dinners, what would become your daily reality? Who would you see more than anybody else? And more important, who would you never see because you can't stand that person? And that reflects your social values. That reflects what's most important to you. Have you ever known someone that was completely stuffed up in every area of their life? And then something happened. This person who was undisciplined, hopeless, unmotivated, lacked willpower, maybe even lacked character. You ever use that accusation for people? Roy Sugarman calls that an attribution error. When we see somebody acting incongruently with what it is they say they want and what they're actually doing, we associate it to some internal attribute that they obviously lack, and we, of course, possess it. But when we ourselves are in that same exact situation, we attribute it to things outside of us beyond our control. But the whole time, in either perspective, we really don't know what we're talking about. So this person has a child, and that child for the first few months is kind of ill. So that baby wakes up screaming and crying 5 times a night. By time number 3, mom and dad wake up screaming and crying every single night. Yet how many times do parents say, oh, you know what, it's been 4 times. Sort it out yourself. And they turn over and go back to sleep. You know any parents like that? Because there's a word for those people. Well, inmates, usually, right? But what happens to someone who demonstrates zero integrity, consistency in every aspect of their life? Then they have a child, and all of a sudden, they become one of the best parents you've ever seen. It's like, what happened to that person? Well, we have a misconception. On a mammalian level, this is true, that we move toward pleasure and away from pain. But then again, how do you explain hunger strikes in that scenario? How do you explain parenting in that scenario? See, human motivation is quite more complex than that. And could you imagine trying to live a life where you totally avoid pain and gain pleasure? So you live a life of frustration because you're trying to attain that which is unattainable and avoid that which is unavoidable until your behaviors and your values come in congruence together. So great visions are achieved when behaviors and values are united. And that takes love. Do you notice the level of love of every presenter on the stage? Well, maybe not love for you, sorry, that's sad. But love for what they do and the people they do it for? Was there any misrepresentation? Could you see any incongruence? And the answer is no, because it takes a lot of sacrifice to get to where they were. I remember back in 2002, you look back in your life and you have a critical event. And I call a critical event something that changes the entire course of your life. Like a boulder in a stream. Your entire trajectory was altered, but you didn't know it at the time. And a lot of times in my life, it was through events like this. And back in 2002, the National Academy of Sports Medicine had our first conference. It was an international conference. People flew in from around the world. And we had some phenomenal speakers, and it was a pivotal event. But sitting there right in the audience was Michelle Dalcourt and Ian O'Dwyer. Now, it was interesting, and we took it as a compliment, is during the breaks, during the lunches, during the dinners, hundreds, literally, of students came up to us and said, I want to do this. I want to present. I want to do what the presenters on the stage were doing. Yet you fast forward a decade and a half later, how many of them actually made it? Yet Michelle Dalcourt and Ian O'Dwyer are some of the most respected and celebrated and highly contributing presenters in the world. And the only difference between them and everybody else in those seats that day was a decision and time. A decision that took them each probably between 1 and 2 million miles of travel around the world. In total, years spent away from their families and their homes, living in an environment of conscious incompetence and well within the center of their discomfort zone. Yet they did what they said they were going to do because they loved the process, not just the outcome. Shakespeare said in regards to love, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not that which alters when the alteration finds, nor bends with the remover to be removed. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks upon tempests and is not shaken. And what that means in modern English, Charles Bukowski said, find what you love and let it kill you. Let it cling onto your back and drag you down into eventual nothingness. Let it devour your remains, because everything kills you, fast or slow. It's best to be killed by a lover. Now, what did he mean by that? Did he mean find a destructive habit, like drinking to excess and die from it? Well, that's actually what he did. When I first read that, I misinterpreted it. I don't really remember much of what happened that year. But anyway, what he was talking about was surrender. Back in 1940, in the Deep South, there was a little girl born to probably one of the most impoverished families in Tennessee. She was born very sickly at about 3.5 pounds body weight. And the doctors were preparing her mother for the fact that that little girl was not going to go home with her tonight. As a matter of fact, she wasn't going to go home. She was expected to not even make it through the evening, but she miraculously did. But by the time she was 5 years old, she found herself in a fight for her very existence twice more, with double pneumonia and scarlet fever. Yet, as she was approaching her 6th birthday, it started to look like she was going to have a normal life that every little girl deserves. And what came out of her was a personality that was charismatic, curious, and highly energetic, and socially adept. But before her 6th birthday, her legs started to weaken and deform underneath her, and she was diagnosed with polio. And because in the 1940s, polio had no cure, she had no hope. See, but her mother, maybe it was denial, maybe it was ignorance, but she refused to accept that. Her mother was extremely resilient and forced her to engage in several hours a day of extremely painful physical therapy. And it was excruciating. And a lot of times this little girl would beg because the doctors were telling her, no matter what you do, you will not get better. Yet her mother is making her endure long, excruciatingly painful bouts of physical therapy. And that seemed astonishing to this little girl. And there would be days where she'd be crying, there'd be tears in front of her mother, begging her to let her rest just for one day. Now think about this. How many of you have kids? Could you imagine your little kid standing in front of you, begging you just one day, and you have to deny that request? You have to deny that request because you're willing to endure the tears of today for a promise of tomorrow, even if that little girl doesn't see it, because you consider yourself, like Paul Taylor's fond of saying, not necessarily the sage on the stage, but the guy by the side. And what a great guy does is even when someone has an aspiration, but they don't have the belief in bringing that aspiration to fruition, you help them go just as far as they can see, because when they get there, they'll see farther. And that's what her mother did. And then when results started to come, they came so painstakingly slow, they only reinforced her discouragement, didn't give her any modicum of hope, until one day her community got together and tried to motivate her to just walk down an aisle. And it was humiliating because every time she picked herself up, she fell right back down. And it wasn't determination, but indignation, because of all the humiliation she had to endure publicly, that by seemingly force of will, she dragged herself clumsily and slowly, yet successfully, down a very short aisle. But then something happened. She no longer needed the belief of her mother. She started to cultivate just a little bit of belief on her own, until one day her high school coach, Ed Temple, talked her into doing, of all absurd things, joining the track and field team. But she was committed, and commitment trumps motivation, because commitment yields behavior. And after months of practicing, quite unsuccessfully, enduring more humiliation, she competed, yet finished dead last in her very first high school race. Fast forward to September 7th, 1960 in Rome, Wilma Rudolph goes down in history as being the greatest female runner of all times by winning 3 gold medals in 1 Olympic Games. Was that belief? She didn't have belief, but she had trust in her mother's belief, because her mother demonstrated irrefutable, unyielding integrity in her promise, no matter how much sacrifice that promise yielded for little Wilma or herself. And in kind, whether through obligation or blind trust in her mother, she demonstrated integrity, woke up and did the same thing day in, day out. Until running wasn't something she did. It was a reflection of who she became. So I guess the takeaways for today, because I'm out of time, am I not? Always. Number one, maybe one of the greatest things we can do for ourselves, each other, and our clients is keep ourselves immersed in an environment like this conducive to winning, so we can hold the space for them in coaching. My belief is greater than your doubt. My belief is greater than your doubt. Until we can encourage them to take accountability for the clarity and execution of the critical behaviors designed to bring their future vision into their current reality, connected to what they value most, as their belief grows and they become independent of the space we hold for them. Because isn't that leadership? The ability to imagine a future for somebody else that does not yet exist and communicate with that individual in a way that makes that vision a reality. If that's not leadership, I don't know what is. And if we don't fall into the category of leaders, I don't know what we do. Would you agree? So hold that space. My belief is greater than your doubt. Critical behaviors. And demonstrate that ourselves as an example. Because what you do daily determines who you become indefinitely. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like I should give you this microphone so you can just drop it and walk away. Hands in the air. Questions for Bobby?
We know you're out there. We can hear you breathing.
this really isn't really a proper question, but how do you retain that much information?
Well, this really isn't a proper answer, but I think Paul Taylor said it has something to do with OCD. I was born physically deformed in my legs and in my face. And, well, yeah, it was actually worse than this at one time, if you can even imagine. And my brain wasn't quite right. I have Tourette's. And I was in specialized classes, like, you're special, and not in a good way, kind of like the short bus special, if you know what that means. And I got to a point where somebody I was working with saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, which is why I'm so passionate about holding that space. And I did not want to grow in the direction he wanted to, not because I was not passionate about the things that he was passionate about. I was. I kind of, in the trans-theoretical model of change, I was kind of what you call a pre-contemplator, which divides into two sections. The people who I won't, and I can't. And I was kind of in the I can't category. And I went to a seminar, kind of like this, and something infected me. Like, not like viral, I mean like really inspired me. I saw greater possibilities. And for years, I became obsessed with and in love with just study and exploration. And we talk about the necessity to study and read and memorize things and understand things, but a lot of times that doesn't work out because we try to tell people it's through force of character, as if they lack character. Everybody loves something. And when you find what it is you love and how to connect what you know you need to do to what matters most to you and how your behaviors help you live more aligned and more actualized in that space of what you truly care about, well, then you have to stop yourself from doing it. You don't have to motivate yourself to do that over and over. It's kind of like a musician. His dad wants him to become an accountant, but all he wants to do is play that damn guitar, and he doesn't finish his studies, doesn't do his homework, and father's like, wow, he's so undisciplined. No, he's beautifully disciplined. He is a musician. And find that music inside of you. And, so the point I'm making is if the brain damaged kid in front of the room can do this shit, so can you.
I don't really know how we're going to follow that up, but anyone else? Up the back.
Actually, you're right. Bonnie, have you studied as an actor? And have you performed? Because you would be brilliant. When you come on stage, I see you, and immediately I get in the zone, and how you pause and present is brilliant. And I'm thinking the characters you would have played, whether it be Harry Potter or what, those characters that really need someone special to do it. And I'm thinking you must have studied acting.
I've been highly influenced by acting because, thank you for that. I think when you talk about acting, there's somebody in our industry who I adore this woman, and she's brilliant. Yet she comes from the stage, and she had the lead role in Phantom, and she's been in many West End, Broadway productions. She's been in a few films. And what she teaches is the art of presenting and communicating. I remember she was speaking at a conference in the States, and we all do this, don't we? She gets tons of feedback, like, this changed my life, most brilliant thing ever. She got one eval that said, if I want to learn how to be a better communicator, I don't need to learn from some actress. Okay, so someone who dedicates their life to mastering the ability through trust and permission to step into a role. Because it's not like we watch a film and we go, liar, liar, we stand up there, that's Johnny Depp, that's not Willy Wonka. I mean, like, you need to be on medication, right? So we step into a role where we utilize all of our experiences and talents and our entire life journey within one moment of being completely present to use our body, our tonality, and not recite, but become the script that the writer has gifted us with in order to provocatively influence how people think and feel, and at the highest point of theater, leave people transformed and better when they leave the theater than when they came in. No, we have nothing in common with actors whatsoever. I would aspire to that. And one of my greatest influences was the great Stanford Meisner, the acting coach, where he said that acting was not about acting, where it wasn't like about the method, where you get into character and you're exactly that person. I know that works very, very well for people like Daniel Day-Lewis, which must be horrifying for his neighbors, but it seemed to help him. It's about living authentically in an imaginary circumstance. So each circumstance is new, but you're not showing up as an actor, you're showing up as you, responding how you would respond in that moment. And the greatest skill set of an actor is being present and listening. It's not performing. Because there's this thing called private solitude, where you let people into your private world, and that's where real sharing occurs. So I'm very much influenced by the arts. Many of my heroes are comedians and stage performers. Yeah.
Thank you. One more round of applause for Bobby Cappuccio.